welcome to In Retrospect. I am Brandon Forbes, and today I am joined by Joshua Tackett.
Hey there.
Josh Franks.
The talkative one.
he's a man of few words.
Glad to be here.
There you go.
And a special guest is actually Tackett from the future. He's come to warn us, or warn Tackett about something to not say during the middle of the podcast that we have to probably cut out.
He was too late.
But for real, this is Stephen Tackett. He is owner and founder of the Audio Planet, which is a sound post house. I mean, they do it all. Literally some of the most talented people. And we use them on a daily basis for all of our sound needs. But on this episode, we figured we would just talk about the importance of just good audio in general when it comes to videos and projects. You know, it's a lot of times you can have good video, but if your audio isn't good, from music to your voiceover to sound design, if none of that, is as good as the video, it almost, brings the whole project down as a whole. So maybe Tackett, you want to kind of start off?
I mean, I thought it might be interesting to talk about how we did audio before we had a separate audio post process. And so we edit in Adobe Premiere Pro. And so it has a host of audio tools which are good. Though, you can get something sounding pretty good. They've got plugins, they've got, they've got a little mixer on the side. You can mix everything, you can add plugins to it, add compression, all that stuff. And you can get pretty well. But I would say the key thing to think about is that Premiere Pro is a video editing program. It's not an audio editing program. So it's almost like there's this certain threshold that you can get to, and you kind of max out. And so, and Frank's, you might be able to talk about this too, but that's kind of like before we saw the light. We were finishing all the audio in Premiere Pro, and we didn't realize what we were missing out on. But I think once we did, it opened up this whole new kind of world and concept to us.
Yeah, a good example of that is, when you watch television, you're watching commercials, and all of a sudden, let's just say you're watching, the ESPN, and a nationally broadcasted commercial comes on, and it sounds equal to the programming that you're watching. And then it cuts to a local commercial, and all of a sudden, the volume drops down about 8 decibels. And you're like, what the hell? I can't even hear anything anymore. You got to turn it up. Well, that's because it's not mixed properly. It's not like the person behind the sticks didn't have the knowledge behind what those decibel levels should be. So when we brought in Stephen, it's not that we were doing a bad job, but what we were doing seemed normal at the time. But then whenever he came into play, we're like, holy moly, like this is a big difference. Like it changed the way our videos are perceived, the way they sound. And maybe talk a little bit about that, Stephen, and just, when we started sending you stuff, what it is kind of like that your approach to that and how you approach broadcast projects in general. Like, what does that kind of process look like for you?
I mean, yeah, usually, to kind of get on the artistic level, I'm usually going, what did the director, what did the editor, what did they intend? What's their intention here on sort of a sonic level? And that can be is it a bright sound? Is it a dark sound? Is it loud? Are there lots of things happening? Is it very quiet? And all that's important because that's the feel that you're going to get that you don't really probably talk about. You're like, I don't know, it feels good or it feels bad, right? So I'm usually chasing like this feel.
Well, as you know, sound is half the experience. It's something we're always talking about. Like the video can be great, but if the sound is terrible, it really drops down the production value of your project. And, we have, luckily, most of us here that have a hand in the editing, we are musicians. Tackett, you went to Pepperdine to play trumpet, had a music scholarship. I used to be in a boy band, no big deal.
Got to bring it up.
A very unsuccessful boy band.
He works that into every episode somehow.
Yeah.
I don't know what the deal is.
It's one of those dreams that I'm going to keep chasing until I'm 80 years old.
And you know what? We'll support you every step of the way.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. But yeah, so we definitely have some music background, which I think is very important to the approach that we have to projects, picking the right music, sound designing that project, sometimes before it goes to Stephen, just so he has an idea of where we're going with that specific sound, like, or just the sound in general. And then I always tell him, hey, Stephen, feel free to add to and or take away from what I've given you, because I don't want to put you in a box, because you're an artist. I don't want to tell somebody how to paint. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But we do give him, in some level, a head start, so you have something to work from, and then he always takes it to the next level, like every single time. And it always blows my mind when I get our sound back, and it's perfect the first time. It's not like a back and forth game we have to play. Like, you've been really good at giving us what I feel is your best foot forward the first time, which is it's invaluable. It's invaluable is what it is.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something. You guys really set me up for success. You know, the way that the files come in, the way the whole thing's arranged and edited. It's almost like, it's kind of like you create this sandbox and I go in there and just go crazy and just make it sound like I think it should sound. And yeah, it's you guys really, set me up for success.
I think another thing to mention too, like I kind of set up in the beginning, is the idea that, as a video editor, you're using a tool that is for video editing, whereas when we send it to you, you're using audio editing tools like Pro Tools, for example, and so you can reach a completely different level with the audio,
right?
Because Pro Tools, I mean, they make records in Pro Tools. Like every song you've ever heard was probably mixed in Pro Tools at some point and recorded in Pro Tools. So like the sound quality is just the sky's the limit when you're using the right tool. So I think that's another huge factor too.
Stephen, maybe, you've been doing this, I don't even know how long, but maybe just give us some insight. How long have you been doing this? And maybe like some milestones and people you've worked with. I don't know, just show off a little bit. I
mean, I've been doing music since a kid, right? And that's how most people get into this industry. Same thing as Frank's. Everybody wants to be the rock star. And so, along the way, I started doing things that paid the bills and it turned into producing music and recording music. And I moved to Los Angeles and worked with, Warner Brothers and Capitol Records, and DreamWorks at the time had a band. And then, ended up working with a guy named 50 Cent. I don't know if you ever heard of him.
Doesn't ring a bell.
Among others.
Is he kind of like Nickelback?
He's kind of like Nickelback.
Are they in the same?
Yeah, they're
so
best
much?
friends. Yeah,
okay.
They hang out. And end up, working with Death Row Records. I mean, when they saw me coming in as a producer, you can just imagine the look on their face, right? A lot of reggae. Anyway, industry changed.
A lot of reggae.
Yeah, I did.
Seriously,
a lot of reggae. The reggae guys love me. I don't know. So the music industry started changing in about between 2004 and 2008, where music became essentially free. Budgets plummeted, so the industry crumbled. And I'm like, okay, now what? So I started getting into broadcast and loved it. I found out that's just as creative and it's just as much fun. And it was the last, frontier for audio people at that time. It's kind of changed now. Music has kind of come back up a little bit. And then, started working on TV shows and films and that kind of thing. And then, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, I'm like, I think this could be an actual company, I could put together an audio post company. So I gave it a shot and just started calling people and say, hey, do you guys need audio post? And then one after another said, yeah, let's do it. So it kind of turned into this really cool company, which it just, and again, I heard one of your podcasts, you guys, in case you don't know, Retrospec Films is based in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma.
Broken Arrow.
Right?
All places.
Broken Arrow.
I mean, if you saw this soundstage we're sitting in, you wouldn't believe it. So my company's just, a few miles down the street. It's the same thing. I'm like, I call people, they're like, where are you based out of? I go, Tulsa. They're like, huh? How? So, anyway, it's great that I can do it here and work with all these great people. It's kind of like working and living in LA without all the traffic and expense and chaos. And, so anyway, that's my resume. Is that it?
It's impressive.
Thank you.
It's funny you say how the music industry has changed, because it really has. And what you're talking about specifically, I remember back in the day when I was in the boy band prime, people were still selling records out of the trunks of their cars.
Yeah.
And studio time was very difficult and super expensive to come by, especially in Tulsa. And the opportunities and the platforms were not readily available like they are today. MySpace was the platform to put music on. People were still downloading LimeWire. No one had GarageBand to make stuff from home. But now everyone with $200 in their pocket has the ability to create music on their own. So what I saw is a lot of companies like, from wherever, honestly, closing because the demand for high production studio time was dwindling. Is that sound correct?
It's the whole dinosaur theory. I mean, in LA, I was working out of this studio called Record Plant, which is massive, right? And it's like $2,000 a day plus the engineer, plus microphones, plus everything else. And then, who can afford that? It's like if you're selling, if you used to sell 4 or 5 million records, and now you're selling 100,000 records, there's no way that you could afford that. I mean, essentially, so they started folding up, and then little, like it basically turned into a producer, an engineer, and an artist, and that's the new model that is now.
The brick and mortar is no longer at the forefront of the industry.
No, not at all. And then I think in the same sense, that also opened up a lot of doors for broadcast production, TV and film production. A lot of film composers are working out of their home or very tiny studios with basically a computer. And like our audio post company, the actual physicality of it is tiny. It's like we're basically an online company with a tiny little office. So that's just, and now you have all the tools to make it sound the way you want it to sound without the $1 million console, right? It'd be nice to have a Neve console, but nobody's going to pay for that.
Yeah, it's not necessary at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got guys that are, doing records and putting stuff out on, Spotify or whatnot that they're just doing by themselves, in their houses. And I mean, and that goes for music, that goes for, sound posts and sound design and scoring. I mean, Tackett, maybe you can talk a little bit about scoring, but that's something that was never, I mean, we used MusicBed and I think Audio Jungle, Soundstripe, we've used these for so long, but then there's just something different when especially if you're working on a long form edit from a client and, the budget's there and we're like, what, here's a couple songs we like, but we would love to score something for you. We really think it's going to take your video from, 90, 100% to like 150%. Let's kind of maybe talk about the ability that we have now where if you want a score for your video, if you want a song that is made for you and that nobody else is going to have, like we can do that now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I had this revelation, a personal revelation. This already was knowledge that I just didn't know about, but I think this was back in probably around 2016 or 2017 when I obviously was working here as an editor, and we would often go on this website called MusicBed and look for music. And there was an artist that I kept using his stuff because it was just amazing, inspiring music named Tony Anderson. And one day I just decided I'm going to Google this guy just to see what he's all about, find his website, learn about his process. Like, how does he create these tracks? And I found this page where he basically went, line by line, every piece of gear, every piece of software, every plugin that he uses to create his music. And I kind of had this epiphany about what's called samples, which is basically like, instead of having to hire a string orchestra, someone has already recorded every single note that a string orchestra played, and you can play it on your keyboard at your house, on your laptop. And I was like, wait, this is possible? Like, you don't have to always, write out an entire score and hand it to a symphony orchestra and pay everyone, every member of the orchestra, of a 50-piece orchestra, $75 an hour times a 2-hour minimum plus the recording fees. Like, all of a sudden, this whole new, like, we're talking about scaling things down and making, things possible that weren't possible before. All of a sudden, this technology came out that makes this possible. And it was around way before I discovered it. For me, that was the first time I'd ever discovered it. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like, I want to learn how to do this. So, kind of on my own, I've studied this and learned a lot about it. But I think, what it kind of goes to is that if you want an orchestral film score for your 30-second commercial, that is a possibility now because of this technology that's out there and because of the accessibility of that sound. It doesn't just have to be a single piano. It can actually be an orchestra. It can be synthesizers. It can be guitars, a drum set. I can play a drum set on my keyboard at home, and it sounds like someone's sitting on a full-size drum kit. And obviously, the more real players you can get in a piece, the more realistic it's going to sound. But there's you can get pretty close. I mean, Stephen might be able to talk more into that too. But I mean, you can get pretty close with what's called virtual instruments, and I think that's what enables the scoring process, as Brandon was talking about, to happen. So all of a sudden, instead of just grabbing a track from MusicBed or Soundstripe or Audio Jungle and just throwing it under your video, all of a sudden you can say, you know what? I want the music to follow every beat of this story. Like whenever the kid walks out, I want the piano to play a little bit of a sad tune because there's a story behind why this kid is here walking out. And then all of a sudden something changes in the story and it becomes more triumphant and you bring in a swelling string orchestra. Or, if you have a video or something that's Stranger Things-esque, you can use synthesizers and kind of create that, 80s vibe. So it's like the possibilities are limitless and you're not constrained to a pre-done music track that someone made who had nothing to do. Like, I think that's the difference between scoring and using a track is like when someone writes a track, they're in their bedroom or their studio or whatever it is with something in mind, and that's the only thing they're thinking about. Whereas when you're scoring something, you are talking to the person who created that video or that commercial, and you're having a dialogue and you're collaborating with them. So the music that you're writing is part of that story. And so it's a completely different level that you can reach.
Just for the record, did you call your dad by his first name?
Well, it's confusing otherwise.
If I were to ever call my dad by his first name, I don't think I would be standing here or sitting here this afternoon.
I never forget that because what you just mentioned, it's like as the years have gone on, I think the first time he called me by a first name, he used to do as a little kid. He'd be like, he'd call me like he was 8. He'd just be rebellious. And so my mom, right, would be like, no, that's disrespectful.
Stephen, I need a sandwich over here, please.
Yeah. But now, like the first time he started doing it, like 18, 19, 20, because we like kind of work in the same realm of stuff, it was kind of weird for me too. I'm like, that's not my name for you,
That's Dad.
What were you going to say though about
I was going to say here, yeah, but the point that I think that you're trying to get at is that it's kind of like you guys did this commercial about 6 months ago where someone's talking to Alexa and Alexa misunderstands, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so a lot of times I think tracks that you get online are like that. It's like, it's the response, but it's not the response that I wanted for me right now. So I have this theory, like every moment has a sound, right? Every moment has a song. And so you have to find that. And when you get, you guys are really good at it. I hear stuff that you guys do, that you guys download from online and you edit it and tweak it and it sounds great. So you guys have cracked that. But a lot of guys just like throw a track on there. And I'm like, don't you hear what's going on and what you're seeing don't match? It just drives me crazy, right?
What?
So that's, if you got the budget, yeah, you want to score it or write it. But
it's like when someone plays the same track for 6 straight minutes, like just put it on repeat and you hear that delay Audio Jungle guitar for 6 straight minutes and you want to like jump off a cliff. Man, that's
what we did. We would go and it was this whole world of audio post wasn't even a thought. And then it's funny, go back, like we've been, updating websites and uploading old videos to YouTube and making playlists. And it's funny watching things that we've finished that were, large projects with budgets that now we would be like, now everything goes through Soundpost. It doesn't matter what the budget is. It doesn't matter if it's a $2,000 project up to, like VeggieTales. It doesn't matter because we're going to put it through Soundpost because we want it to be the best that it can be. Even if it's like, no, it's fine. We'll do it because it needs it. But listening to things that we've done in the past without Soundpost, it's night and day. Just vocals. We mic everybody. We do boom on every interview. We do everything we can to make it sound good, but it's still not enough, and it needs that extra 10%. That that's what Stephen does.
And the funny thing is sometimes the sound as a hard cost is always like, well, what do you mean that song's going to cost $400?
Yeah.
Well, what do you mean? It's almost like when people see a line item for sound and it gets a little bit expansive, it can, I guess. It's almost like that's the first thing they look at. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
But it's so important. And I honestly, I cannot stress that enough. We do that a lot here, and I think that's what's made us successful.
I think one thing me and Franks talk about too is, a good edit. If an edit is good, you can close your eyes and know whether that's good edit or not. And I think it's kind of the same thing with Soundpost. Is a good commercial or a good film or something. If you're watching TV and you get to the commercial break, close your eyes, and you will be able to tell how the quality level of each different commercial just from the sound. And I think when you open your eyes, you're only thinking about the visual and you're not thinking about the sound, but you are experiencing the sound. And I think, it's more in the back of your brain and you're not really thinking about it, but that's the difference. It's like you can just close your eyes and listen and you'll be able to hear the quality and then that will probably dictate what the visuals look like too, whether the visuals are good.
Yeah. And I'm always like, someone's like, well, how important is audio? And then I say, like, what? So, that's an extreme example, right? But it's the same thing. If you I don't know, you guys can't see behind these guys have lights, right? There's lights on us and it looks, trust me, if these lights, or if it was just like a little lamp or something, it would look terrible. But
speak for yourself, Stephen.
Well, but the thing is, the viewer's not going like, wow, what amazing lighting. They're just like, oh, this looks pleasant.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. This feels good.
My eyes feel good.
Yeah. And that's how audio should be. Just, of course it should sound like that, right? That's the way it's supposed to sound. So,
It's one of those things is if it's good, you don't know what's going on. If it's bad, you're going to be offended by it.
How many movies you go to and immediately you hear the score and you're like, it's going to be a good movie or a bad movie? Or at least that's what
Yeah.
You just know. You're like, okay, it's a B movie. I can tell from the music.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, basically any movies that has any music from the 80s, I'm kind of out on. That sounds bad. I'm not an 80s music kind of guy with all the synths, like you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
All of a sudden synthesizers came out. It's like everyone's got to have it in their music. Oh, it drives me
Stranger
nuts.
Things. Stranger Things
It's like
does
Beverly
it well.
Hills Cop.
It's a good thing they aren't making Beverly Hills Cop anymore.
Yeah, and another thing I was gonna say too is like, I do a lot of the graphics here, and I have this thing is where I get my graphics done, and I know like when I send this to sound and it comes back, the same graphics that I just did with the sound and without the sound effects literally they look better, they look more complex, and I didn't change them. Nothing changed, but the sound. When the sound is there, all of a sudden it's more real. Because everything in life, if I touch this mic, you see it, you see me touching it, and you hear me touching it. So there's like it's half of our experience in real life. So it's the same way when we experience video too.
And this is a little esoteric kind of trick that I use is, especially with the stuff you guys do, I'm adding sound and texture and color and all this kind of stuff. And then when that color and that look just starts to kind of pop off the screen, you know what I'm saying? It's like, yeah, that's what he wanted. I brought that out just through sound, and it takes time, right? We don't have time to do everything to cinematic levels, but sometimes you guys let me do that. But yeah, it's like it does. I'm like, yeah, now that graphic really pops, or that dialogue really communicates, And
it's weird whenever a good sound post comes back, which is always, you as the editor or the graphics person, you feel like you just got better. You're like, I made that.
Yeah.
Like that's my
exciting
work. And it's you feel more proud of something that you've done, even though you're adding something that someone else has done. It's just like a great, any great teamwork, like good lighting is going to make a good actor seem better and look better.
Yeah.
Good makeup.
It's going to make the mood.
Exactly. So it's like that person, they may be a great actor, but if they don't have makeup on and they aren't lit properly, they're not going to look right.
Yeah.
So it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
I hope you guys can tell that I'm not even passionate about this at all.
No.
So, okay.
No. I mean, you're probably just as passionate as Frank is about being in the boy band.
Yeah, I'm going to make a comeback.
I don't doubt it.
I'm going to make a comeback.
Awesome. Well, I hope you guys kind of learned a little bit about our kind of sound post process and why we put so much emphasis on just making sure that the videos that we're making for our clients are just as good as possible. I mean, I think we would all say here that sound is just as important as video, and in some cases, maybe even more important. But thank you, Stephen, for joining us.
That, right?
Yeah, do the peace sign. We're going to put a link to...
I don't understand that. Why is it sideways?
Stay away!
Stephen, first of all, you got to put it together sometimes.
Okay. What is...
Actually, let's not do
I think
that.
he just did a gang symbol. Just edit that
I'm
out.
going to have to cut all of this out.
Blur it.
I'm going to put a link to The Audio Planet, which is Stephen Tackett's company. You guys can check out their work. But we appreciate you listening, and we'll see you next time.
And make sure to like and subscribe if you want to hear more.
Ring that bell.
Ring that bell.
I was ringing it for you.
Whoa.
Nice.
Cool.
Hey, Stephen, before we go, could you write down that word you said?
Esoteric?
Esoteric? That's actually a first for me. I haven't heard that one. I'd like to use that in a sentence sometime.